Hello, Ann. Can you introduce yourself to the Informs membership?
Sure. My name is Ann Campbell. I'm the department head for the Department of Business Analytics at the Tippie College of Business at the University of Iowa.
And how long have you been an Informs member?
I have been an Informs member approximately 25 years, which makes me
Wow,
sound really old.
long time Informs member. Thank you for sticking with us. Can you tell us how you got started in your OR career?
Sure. So I did my undergraduate degree at Rice University, and I did applied mathematics and computational science as my degree. But the way I sort of would say I got started in OR precedes that a little bit, and that I went to college like most people with no idea what I was going to major in. So I just tried a collection of different classes. I went from political science thinking I was going to be an elected official to science classes to I took a class on applied math that used algorithms to solve very hard problems. And a light just turned on and it made me realize that solving and problems using OR was kind of like solving a puzzle. And I really liked it. And so that became my undergraduate major. Then I decided to work for a couple years and then go to grad school. And I went to Georgia Tech, where I majored in industrial engineering, but with a specialization in optimization, and sort of took off from there in terms of getting my PhD and my faculty career in OR.
Great. Yes, I also went in undecided in undergrad, and I was also a poli-sci major for about one semester.
Well, I've given several talks to high school female students in the area for a program we have called Sonia Kovalevsky Day. And I think it really helps students to realize that not everyone who is talking to them who was at a senior place in their career always knew that was what they wanted to be, that all of us search and look, and no one grows up saying, I know what OR is, right? You have to sort of look around and find.
Yeah. So do you use that program to enhance the OR in high school, or is that just mainly a high school seminar?
So our math department puts on Sonia Kovalevsky Day. Sonia Kovalevsky is a famous Russian mathematician who was a woman. And so there's several programs throughout the state on a certain day in the spring. And so I've just spoken as a keynote speaker in the one we have on campus at the University of Iowa. It reaches out to students in Eastern Iowa who are female students who are potentially interested in a career in STEM. So they hear all different kinds of things about what they could do with a career in STEM.
I was going to ask you what advice you have for early career professionals, but if you even want to go younger, if you have advice for young ORMS students, what would you say?
I'll say I was thinking about with assistant professors, because I do a lot of different panels and such where I give advice to young assistant professors. So I'll start there. One of my biggest ones, and it's one a lot of people hear, is to really guard your time. I think a lot of people, particularly some of us women assistant professors, feel obligated to say yes to all kinds of things when really saying no is just fine. But one thing that has been helpful for me is when there are things that come up where it's not straightforward if it's a good opportunity or a bad opportunity, but will take time out of your life and your career and your research. I think it's not a bad thing to go to your department head or other senior colleagues and get their advice on whether or not this committee or this search committee is a good use of your time. That's something that has benefited me. For example, I got asked to be on a search committee for the provost a few years ago, and I wasn't sure if it was a good idea. My department head suggested it, and it turned out to be a really interesting thing for me to kind of open up my eyes to all the things that go on at a university. But one thing I do recommend that a lot of junior people do that might sound a little maybe different is to be on their department search committee. I think most people's departments aren't that big, so that who they hire can have a really direct impact on who they have available to work with and share teaching materials with. And so it can be such a big impact, particularly on junior people who maybe don't have a full set of network and co-authors yet, that really try to be involved with that. And really, if you are on the committee, you can have a big impact on who comes to campus and who ultimately gets hired. And I know that for me, that's something I've been involved in with a lot, and had impact on the people we hired being people I work with. So I have a big support of that particular committee, at least
that's
in
great
my
advice.
personal life.
Great, thank you. Would you say that the work and research you do saves lives, saves money, or solves problems? Which one, or more than one? And why would you say that?
I would love to say save lives, but I can't say that. I would say, like most academics, I would have to say solves problems, just because to be able to understand the core issue of a problem, and we kind of have to pull off a few layers of the real world and the reality to really start understanding it. So even though I do a lot of work in disaster relief and last mile delivery, I'm trying to build insight into what are the best solutions for those problems. Like, how do we make sure we are best prepared for a disaster in terms of what are the supplies we store and how much we store, and how do we do all kinds of preparations? What are the best ways to deliver products from Amazon? I'm really turning them into math and trying to solve the math, and then hoping the companies can go away and apply them and do those things like save the money and save the lives. But I would like to hope that ultimately some of the things that I've worked on across different industries are out there doing those things.
Right.
But I'm really working on the problem and trying to build the insight. For example, most of the work I've done on humanitarian relief, I've really been just trying to understand how you solve those problems different than in a traditional business context. What's the difference in the priority? How should you organize things if you're not just worried about cost, and how do the answers change? And so I'm just trying to understand the core issues, so hopefully it can turn into something that's useful for the communities that need it.
Great, thank you. Speaking of communities, you're a member of several Informs communities and societies, including the diversity community, the Women in ORMS, Transportation Science, and the Inform Speakers Program, and that's just to name a few. Why do you find this involvement so important?
Well, my sort of biggest involvement over my time in Informs has definitely been transportation science and logistics. I've been part of that the whole time, and I've been officers and things like that within that organization. I think it's so important, and this is another good piece of advice for people who are earlier in the career, is find a community where you can have a smaller place within the bigness of Informs. I think, for example, an Informs meeting, the one in the fall, is kind of intimidatingly large. I always think of that Houston conference center that was so huge, looking for your different rooms. I can see how someone could feel very lost. But when you go to the TSL meeting or whatever your society is, you're guaranteed to go to a room with some familiar faces that you can see and can connect with and network with. And since that's one of the big goals of going to a conference, is networking with them and networking with people in your field, having one room that they're in can really be helpful for that. I love going to TSL meetings for one, myself seeing familiar faces. I love being able to introduce my PhD students to the senior people in their field that they admire and want to meet, so that maybe they can get to know them and use that for networking for themselves. It's a great opportunity to meet up with co-authors and all have them in one location. So it's been great for me to have that place to go to for an Informs meeting, and also have that connection beyond the Informs meeting through being an officer, being involved in different committees, it really feels like I have a better connection with Informs than if I was just a member.
So through transportation science and logistics, have you found colleagues that you can author papers with, or just made friendships? What have you gotten out of that?
Absolutely. And really have a lot of good discussions. And you can also see through the different awards people are getting, you can see also what is the new topics that are coming out as popular. And it's just a really nice community to get to know lots of people in your field and see what people are working on. So you can just talk to somebody that maybe you haven't met before, but you say, hey, I saw your talk, it was really good. Tell me more about what you're doing. I have found research collaborators totally at an Informs meeting, just talking to someone about their talk, say, hey, you seem to know how to figure this one part out that I haven't quite figured out. Can we work together? So it's useful on a lot of different levels.
Great, that's awesome. So apart from the networking and the smaller groups at Informs, what's your favorite Informs member benefit?
That's kind of a tricky one. I think about that a lot because obviously the networking is a huge piece, so we're not counting that one. I would say the awards piece and seeing people get awards and being involved with awards, I think is a big part of what Informs does for a lot of people. For example, I remember an Informs meeting a few years ago where a colleague from my department won an award at the TSL meeting. My PhD student won a travel award at the TSL meeting. And so that not only made me happy, but it made me feel like it really was putting the University of Iowa on the map as a group that's doing transportation science. Yeah. And speaking of awards, since I just became department head last year, one of my goals was to submit our department for the UPS George Smith Award, because I believe Informs gives recognition to a department that's better than any recognition I could create. So we submitted a packet and we're in the finalists for the George Smith Prize next month.
Yes, well, good luck.
Thank you.
You also volunteered as an ambassador for the virtual 2020 Informs annual meeting. Thank you for volunteering. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Sure. So I wanted to be very supportive of the virtual meeting because I know it was a challenge to try to put all that together. So that was one little thing I could check off to do. So I had 2 different times where I went in the virtual meeting area within the conference and had different people meet up with me. One time was on the topic of transportation and once was on the topic of job hunting. Since I've been on search committees many times, I thought I could give advice on either. Both times I had, 5 to 7 people show up with questions. It seemed like when I did the transportation one, the people came specifically to ask me questions and ended up sending me papers. I think maybe they were junior and looking for feedback. So that was very rewarding. And then on the job search, it was more general job search questions. So it was fine. I didn't have huge numbers, but I felt like it was my little thing I could do.
Yeah, I'm not sure that any of them had huge numbers, but if every small group that met found an impact, then that's what we were hoping for. So how about some pros and cons of virtual versus in-person meetings, since now you've done both with Informs?
Well, I have to say I am looking forward to an Informs meeting in person more than I ever have. Initially, the virtual meetings had their own novelty because of you could go to conferences in your pajamas or whatever. But I think we're all ready to be back in person and see other people and network and have that more open dialogue. The virtual piece has certainly been nice to be able to gather people from all different locations. For example, we had a seminar series in our department, and we've been able to have people from China and Italy who maybe wouldn't normally come over for a seminar be able to do that. So that has a benefit. but that dialogue and that discussion and that personal contact, I think we're all sort of craving that. So I think we're all ready to move a little out of the virtual and into the in-person meeting again. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking
Well,
we'll have good attendance in Anaheim.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you haven't heard yet, it will be hybrid. So you and anyone else who's ready to come, we're ready for you.
I will be there.
All right. So obviously the COVID-19 pandemic has affected things like our conferences. How has it affected your last year, either professionally or otherwise?
Well, ironically, the thing I have right after this is I'm going to go get my first vaccine. So I'm excited about that. That makes today a really good day. But in terms of how it affected me professionally is totally unrelated to COVID. I was scheduled to become the interim department head on March 1 of 2020, just due to movements in the college. And so 2 weeks into my new job, obviously the world changed. So the peaceful summer I thought I was going to have became, what do we do about fall, and what are the new guidelines, and what kind of classrooms? And so it made for a much busier summer and a much more evolving process of things changing all of the time. But it made me not understand what normal is, and because now I'm still doing meetings, but now it's all still pretty much everything is virtual. So it has affected my perspective on this new position. And I don't know what normally being department head is. I'm looking forward to finding that out.
I guess whenever that happens.
It sure shown me what a great department we have, and that everyone really pulled together. For example, last year we created an initiative because we saw so many students were losing their summer jobs due to COVID, that we created some internships that we didn't have before. We created them and supported them with some money we had in the department, and through some funds we had to give 16 students. We couldn't do a ton, but we gave 16 students internships that had lost theirs. We created a few classes to help students get Tableau certifications so they could have something to show for their summer because they didn't have an internship. So everybody really pulled together. I obviously couldn't do that. Just with me, different people had ideas, and we were able to do the best we can. And so I was really impressed in hindsight that we pulled all that off.
That's great. So you mentioned you were looking forward to a peaceful summer last summer. What would a peaceful summer look like? What do you like to do for fun or to relax?
So in Iowa, is where I live, and I don't know if it's an Iowan thing, but I like to have a very big garden. I just had mine doubled yesterday, so I'm excited to do double the gardening this year.
Great.
And grow tomatoes and all those things you grow. I love to do that. I love to cook different things using things out of the garden. I love to walk my dogs in the neighborhood. My son, who's an only child, convinced us his desperate need for a new dog during the pandemic. So we fell for the pandemic.
Yeah, you weren't the only ones. Yeah.
So now let's walk 2 dogs and just simple pleasures.
Great. If you could have dinner with one famous person from history, who would it be and why?
That's a really, really hard one, right? Because there's so many people that they're interesting things that you want to pick their brain about. So I'm going to punt with a couple, just because I think there's just so many. So in my life, I've always been impressed by women who seem fearless. I always want to know, like, where do they pull that from, right? And how are they able to? Because that's my goal. Is I always want to seem that way. So I always want to ask people, how do you do that? So different women in history who had that trait, I would like to say, are you really fearless? Did you have a way you did that? So examples I can think of is I grew up in Houston, Texas. And in the 90s, we had a governor named Ann Richards. She had the big white bouffant hair and was the first woman governor in the state of Texas, and always came off as fearless and funny and smart. And she is one I'd like to talk about, you know, how did you cross into that and cross through that glass ceiling and always come off so strong and fearless? And a current example is Kamala Harris. Like, and it's not even a political thing. It's just the first woman vice president. I would like to say, like, how do you do that, and how do you handle yourself in certain situations? I'm always looking for role models on how to do things better.
Well, thank you, Ann, for your time today.